job, basically, or a quarterback job with another team. Again, he reiterated, I'm happy being a backup and doing what I can do for the Philadelphia Eagles. All expected answers. But you're in that locker room. You've talked to Carson Wentz. You've talked to Nick Foles. I know they're friends. I know, but business is business. Do you really think that Nick Foles is happy being a backup to Carson Wentz?
It's a crazy situation. I mean, you could arguably make the case that Nick Foles is the best quarterback in Eagles franchise history. And here he is. He's a backup. Obviously Norm Van Brocklin back in 1960 when the Eagles won an NFL championship would be in that conversation. But, Nick Foles had that 27 touchdown, 2 interception season back in 2013, and then he becomes the Super Bowl MVP. And yet here he is. He's still warming the bench. Earlier in the week, I went up to New York City. I was invited to the Sirius XM radio facility up there, their studios, and sat in on a town hall with. Yeah, I sat in on a town hall with Nick Foles. He was interviewed. The moderator was Jim Miller, the former NFL quarterback. Spent most of his career with the Chicago Bears, but he moderated it. But it was cool. It was a cool format because there was about 30 Sirius XM radio subscribers in the studio, and they were able to ask questions, which was really neat to hear other people ask Nick questions. And one of those questions was, are you happy to be a backup? I mean, that's the popular question. And Nick talked about having to humble himself to be a backup because he loves to play. He loves to be in the huddle. And he said these are things that every day he has to work on, understanding his role as the backup. So, he talks about, I'm happy to be a Philadelphia Eagle. And, he is. He's in a good position. If you read his book, Believe It is the name of it, he talks about what an impact it made on him emotionally when he got the call telling him he was traded to the St. Louis Rams back after that 2014 season. He was working out at the time. He was looking forward to becoming the Eagles quarterback for the next couple of years under Chip Kelly. And when the call came in, and he talks about that and how that impacted him, and that kind of led to some struggles that he had in St. Louis. He wasn't quite understanding the offense, and he talked about all this, during this town hall. He wasn't quite understanding the St. Louis offense as quickly as he should, and that kind of surprised him because he's usually quick to pick things up. But he thinks it was because he was emotionally impacted from that trade. He said, I understand, yes, it's a business, but we're still human beings. And that kind of thing still impacts you. So, you look at the struggles he had in St. Louis, which led to him being benched about halfway through the season. And then he talked about quitting football after leaving the St. Louis Rams when he was cut. He talked about quitting the game. And Andy Reid called him and talked to him and shared some of the struggles that Andy Reid had in his career. And he said he's like a father figure to me, Andy Reid. And he was going to give up the game. He went fly fishing with his brother-in-law for 3 days. He spent in the wilderness, no phone service, nothing. And he kind of had an awakening. Yeah, football is where he wants to be. And when he came back from that trip, he talked to Andy Reid, and Andy Reid brought him to Kansas City as a backup to Alex Smith. So now here he is again after playing the best football of his life, back on the bench in favor of Carson Wentz. And Nick Foles is a competitor. He wants to play. He wants to be a starter, but he loves Carson Wentz. They have a great relationship, the two of them. He loves the Philadelphia Eagles organization. He loves living in Philadelphia. When he was a free agent, before he decided to come back to Philadelphia when the Kansas City Chiefs released him, one of the other suitors was the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, whose head coach is Dirk Cutter, who recruited Nick when Nick was in high school, and Dirk Cutter was the head coach at Arizona State. And Nick committed to Dirk Cutter in Arizona State after his junior year. But then Dirk Cutter got fired, so Foles decided he didn't want to go to Arizona State anymore. But Dirk Cutter and the Bucs were definitely in the mix when Foles decided to come to Philly as a free agent because he knew Philadelphia. He knew people in Philly. He wanted to go to a place that he knew and didn't want to go to a place where he wasn't known. So, yeah, for now he's a backup. But now you look here at the Tampa Bay Bucs, and we talked about this earlier with Jameis Winston being suspended and Fitzpatrick now the quarterback. Would Dirk Cutter decide that he wants to trade for Nick Foles and make him the starter, and maybe they can part ways with Jameis Winston? These are all things that are being talked about in Philadelphia right now. Could Nick Foles be on his way to Tampa at some point because of that relationship with Dirk Cutter? That could happen. I think what it will depend on is how Carson Wentz does once training camp opens. will that knee be sound enough to have him cleared for full contact? Right now, Wentz can do just about everything, but have full contact in practices, and we're going to see if that's going to change, once training camp begins on July 25th. If it does, then maybe Nick Foles becomes expendable, and the Eagles grant him his wish. The Eagles know what Nick Foles wants to do. He wants to go be a quarterback, a starting quarterback, and feel secure in that job. That's what his goal is. But right now, he is content to be a backup, and I've talked to Nick about it. And, as much as he talks about having to humble himself to be the backup, he's prepared for it because he loves the organization and he likes Carson Wentz a bunch. So that's where he stands right now. But don't be surprised if something should happen as we get deeper into the summer here regarding Nick Foles and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Absolutely. Rick, I know you got to pop off here. Before you go, though, Ed, I know we're going to try real hard. Rick and I are trying real hard to get down there to Philadelphia for the Philadelphia Eagles and the Colts game.
That'd be so great.
So we're excited about we are very excited about that, and Ed has signed up to be our official Philly tourist and tour guide, if you will, and he said he's going to – He said he's going to run the steps with us, Rick. The Rocky steps.
I might make up about 8 steps.
Well, listen, we can only do that if we drink 3 raw eggs out of a cup before we go up, right? We got to get a dozen eggs, crack 3 into a glass, just like Rocky, and run up the steps.
Oh my God!
That'll give us exactly what we need to get up those steps.
I would get halfway up and puke those eggs up.
Well, the only saving
Which one of you guys going to put on the black sock hat and make us chase chickens around?
I think they passed the city ordinance after that movie that you couldn't do that in the streets anymore.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
and Mo from the BS Sports Show said he might like to join us as well. So it could be a very fun and interesting weekend there in the city of brotherly love. So, Ed, your job is to keep us out of jail. No, I'm just kidding.
Right.
All right. Well, I'll see what I can do about that. I can't make any promises, but.
All right, Rick, we'll let you go. Go ahead and go, Rick. That's fine. I just wanted to get one more thought from Ed before we end this segment. But I'm going to try my best to be down there. I'll call you after the show, brother.
Sure. Yeah, I was just going to say that Ed stole my hot take about Nick Foles and Dirk Cutter in Tampa Bay and the whole situation going on down there. But, it's Ed. He's always on top of his game. I knew he was going to do it when he started talking about Nick Foles and Dirk Cutter in Arizona, and I knew where it was going. I was like, man, he's all over it now. So yeah, but you guys have a
sorry about that, Rick.
I know no worries, man. The 4th is on Wednesday, obviously, but you guys have a great holiday weekend. And Tom, I hope you can make it down today. So it's going to be a lot of fun, buddy.
All right, buddy. We'll talk to you soon.
Be safe, Rick.
Yeah, see you guys.
Rick.
Will do.
Rick-riggin, our official executive producer here at The Balance, and he's got his annual 4th of July party that is never lets you down. I'll put it that way, Ed. It is lots of fun by all. Leave the kids at home, though. I'll just say that. I'm just kidding. Just kidding. So I appreciate you jumping on with us. I wanted to real quickly talk with you about our new head coach here at Indianapolis, someone you're very familiar with, and that's Frank Reich. I don't know that we've really had a conversation with you about him, but he seems to be adjusting very, very well here. And I can tell you one thing, the media love him. He's been making all kinds of media appearances. He's been on TV shows. He's been on radio shows. He's been around town. He's been seen in restaurants. Fans are posting pictures of him. Fans are saying how much they really like this guy, how genuine he is. His press conferences about Andrew Luck seem to be very real. Andrew Luck is now talking. He's throwing a football. He seems to be very, very confident. A lot of people like the way that he's been able to just step in from day one and out the gate and really take charge of this team that really needed some really good leadership going into the next season. We don't know where it's going to end up at. We don't know if we're going to be in playoff contention. But like he said to the press the other day, we're going to work through this. We're going to make mistakes, and we're going to get better from those mistakes. And we're going to if we're not failing, then we're doing something wrong. So we're going to work through that. So help us get to know Frank Reich, the person, Frank Reich, the coach. I think that Jim Irsay made a good decision with Frank Reich.
Yeah, well, listen, I love Frank Reich. I got to know him pretty well here in Philadelphia with Doug Peterson for 2 years, and I think the Colts kind of lucked into getting him, right? I mean, he wasn't their first decision, but I really
no, he wasn't.
No, I know. So I think they really lucked out.
The name will never be. The name will never be mentioned in this city ever again. Go ahead.
Right. Or the team that the guy coaches for. But
that's
yeah,
right.
I know
that team, right?
Yeah, right. But anyway, so yeah, I mean, I think he's a gentleman's gentleman, Frank Reich. And so much was made. I think one thing you have to remember about Frank is that he used to play the game. He was a backup quarterback for the Buffalo Bills and Jim Kelly for a very, very long time. And to me, I think that's why Doug Peterson has had the success he had here in Philadelphia, was because he was a backup quarterback to Brett Favre and Dan Marino, and played under some good coaches. And, same thing with Frank Reich. I think that goes a long way in an NFL locker room, as players inside that locker room know that their coach played this game and played it at a high level. He was a quarterback. He had command of the offense. He had command of a locker room because of the position he played. Whether he was a backup or a starter, it doesn't matter. He played in the NFL as a quarterback. And Frank Reich, of course, authored that great comeback game in the playoffs against the Houston Oilers, I believe it was. So that goes a long way in an NFL locker room, and players know that the coach knows exactly what you're going through. And that's what the players talked about with Doug Peterson, is Doug has a good feel for what goes on inside a locker room. He has a good feel on how to run practices and how to motivate players and when to push and when to back off, because he's been through it, and not just for a year or two. Peterson was a backup for 12 years. Reich, I think, was a backup for 13 years, and that's a long NFL career, regardless of whether you're a starter or not. And I think that's one advantage that Frank brings to that locker room, is those players know that. And on Frank's side of things, he knows what motivates them. He knows how to get the most out of those players because he's been through it. He's been under coaches. He played under Marv Levy, a great coach. So he understands what goes on in that locker room, and he'll probably do like what Doug did, and that's put together a leadership council of players with experience who he can talk to on a daily basis and kind of gauge the temperature of a locker room and what's going on. And when you bring 53 personalities together in one locker room, and 10 more if you count the practice squad guys, so 63 different personalities, players from across the country into one locker room, it's not always going to click. It's not always going to work. The chemistry isn't going to always be there. But if you have a good feel for what's going on in that locker room, and as a former NFL player, Frank Reich will have that feel, that is immense. That is so valuable to have that. And I think that's what it'll be for Frank with the Indianapolis locker room, is he'll have the temperature. Now, you're only going to be as good as your talent, and he's going to have to work in conjunction with the GM to bring in players. I know the Colts still have some holes to fill. It all can't get done in 1 year. But, the Indianapolis fans will have to have patience and know that I think that franchise is in good hands with Frank Reich. I know one thing that the Eagles and Doug Peterson will miss about Frank is Doug and Frank were the last two guys to sit together the night before a game, and Doug's talked about this and Frank's talked about this, and they bounced ideas off each other, plays off each other during the scripting of the first 15 to 20 plays of every game. You know how teams like to have that script that they operate from once the game begins. So during the week, that script would be put together, but at the very end, Doug and Frank would get together and they would sit there and they would go over each play and talk about how could they make it better, what can they do differently. And they would sit there for hours, the two of them, and go through that and try to make that script as best as it can be. So I think, Frank will be sorely missed here in Philadelphia. I think of all the losses that the Eagles have had, and you could say LeGarrette Blount going to the Lions as a running back, and Vinnie Curry going to Tampa, or Bo Allen going to Tampa. They're big losses, but I think the biggest loss and the most under-the-radar loss is losing Frank Reich and that relationship he had with Doug, and the relationship Frank had with his players in that locker room. But that's something that he'll bring to Indianapolis and will help make him successful.
Well, we're looking forward to it. Do you think Frank Reich is going to be a good companion piece for Andrew Luck?
Yeah, I absolutely do. And I think